Hola, amigas, and welcome to the Gold Hoops and God podcast. I'm Dr. Guerra, your host. This podcast is designed for Millennial Latinas and is fueled by faith and culture. Ignite the fire within. Welcome back, amigas, and thank you for joining me on this week's episode of the Gold Hoops and God podcast. If this is your first time joining me, I really appreciate you for tuning in. If you've been rocking with me since episode 1, you're the best. So, how are folks doing? We're about midway through the month of June. If you're listening in real time, 'tis the season of graduations, outdoor adventures. People are starting to fire up the barbecue and embrace those summer vibes. Ya es verano y el cuerpo lo sabe. So, in previous episodes, I've explored a little bit about Catholicism and different aspects of religion and faith. And honestly, the spiritual life of Latinx folks is so complex. One of the things that I've noticed to be true for a lot of Latinas is the ability to hold multiple truths at the same time. In other words, in the many years of studying religion and unpacking the belief system of Latinx folks, I can say that syncretism is a huge part of how many Latin American and US Latinos view the world. So, for example, world renowned Chicana author Sandra Cisneros, she calls herself a Buddha Lupist. Now, you may be thinking, what on earth is a Buddha Lupist? And this is Sandra Cisneros of House of Mango Street fame. So, let me explain. She, like many Latinas, has a deep respect for La Virgen de Guadalupe. And like many spiritual but not really religious Latinas, she still feels a connection to La Virgen, despite the direct connection to Catholicism. Now, I do have to mention that Guadalupe is also known as Tonantzin. Tonantzin is the Aztec goddess of the earth, or she's known as the Earth Mother in Nahua. Sandra Cisneros has found a way to connect her admiration for La Virgen and her Buddhist practice. So she was introduced to Buddhism. She learned about Thich Nhat Hanh and started embracing the practice of Buddhism. But she's a really great example of someone living in the both and. So it's not an either or, it's more of a both and. While this may sound a little unusual or strange for folks, for Latinas and Latinos, this is not so uncommon. The ability to navigate and embrace more than one tradition is really amazing, and it pushes back against this desire for purity. And fun fact, Christianity is always already a combination of beliefs because of the influence of Judaism and Greco-Roman culture. There is no such thing as a pure Catholicism or a pure Christianity, honestly. So, this obsession with orthodoxy and purity doesn't quite make sense. Cisneros helps us to think about the many ways that we can navigate multiple worlds. Going to a Botanica on Friday and then church on Sunday is not unheard of. And as I've gotten older and through the formal study of theology and religion over the years, my own lived experience has begun to make sense. Like the pieces have started fitting and coming together. And in reading the research, so research by US Latinx theologians like Carmen Nanco Fernandez, Orlando Espín, Cecilia Gonzalez Andreu, and many more, things started to make sense, right? Their explanation of lived religion, popular religion, it began to make sense. And I've been privileged enough to have conversations with them in person, and they've all served as both official and unofficial mentors for me. So, moving on, I wanted to talk about Botanicas. And as I begin to talk about Botanicas specifically, I would like to recommend the book Botanica Los Angeles. So, this book is by Patrick Arthur Polk. It's called Botanica Los Angeles Latino Popular Religious Art. If there's no Botanicas in your area, then this is a really beautiful visual of what Botanicas are often like. There's even tons of videos on YouTube from Botanicas. Usually, the owners of the Botanicas will offer some basic spiritual advice. They'll upload videos and they'll kind of go over what services they offer and describe the products that they sell in their stores. It's really fascinating. These are really incredible spaces. And if you do decide to explore in person, always use your best judgment. And what I'm going to share today is going to stay rather general, and there's reasons for this. So, botanicas, when we talk about botanicas, those are the stores themselves. Think of them as a spiritual market, as a spiritual marketplace where you can pick up the things that you need, all of your spiritual needs. So, people go to botanicas for lots of different reasons. And these healers or curanderas, so I'll be using curanderas and curanderos kind of interchangeably. Um, and these folks who work in the botanicas, they're usually very in tune with divinity. They usually come from a long line of healers. And there are curanderas who have learned this ancestral medicine through their families, either through grandmothers or mothers or uncles or different people in their family lineage. Or they may have realized that they themselves had a powerful spiritual gift and decided to pursue it. So usually when a person walks in to a botanica, the curandera will ask what they need help with. So for example, people will come in saying that they want to make more money, they want to increase their wealth, or they want to bring back an ex-lover, or they want help with a physical ailment. It really ranges. People have all different needs and they come into the botanica seeking different types of help. Now, it's important for me to say that there is a difference between a person, for example, who's seeking protection, right? Protecting their home, protecting their family, versus someone who's trying to enact a spell on somebody else. So this is very common in terms of love, right? So they call them amares or love spells. So let's say an ex-lover who's very upset will go to a botanica and pay the curandero to kind of put a spell or cast a spell on the other person or cause their new relationship to fail, all those kind of things. It can get really interesting. So, as with anything, there is light and dark, there's good and evil. Okay, so you must use your discernment, you must use your better judgment. If you do choose to go into botanica, if you do choose to seek the advice of a curandero, that's up to your discernment. So once a client shares what they're looking for, it can be as simple as a candle recommendation. So with the example about seeking financial abundance, the curandera will say, you should light a green candle, for example, green symbolizing, wealth, fortune, prosperity, and you should light a green candle for a week, for example. Or it can be much more involved. A lot of times, botanicas will have a separate room or like a back room, a back workspace in which these rituals are performed. The next section that I'm going to talk about are limpias, but it may be the case that the curandera will advise to perform a ritual at home, or they may do it in the store, right? It may be more involved and they may ask to do the ritual there in the store. And so that's why they have those extra space or kind of a back room in which to do those type of things. And I do have to say, as I share about this, as I talk about this, I do feel a little bit conflicted. And there are things that I am intentionally not sharing or I'm being a little vague about. Why is this? Because as much as sharing information is good, it's wonderful to learn new things and that's fabulous. I have the utmost respect for healers and for shamans and curanderos and Reiki practitioners, anyone who does that kind of work, tarot readers, etc. I have the utmost respect. And so I do think there needs to be some mystery, some privacy, to where not everything will be divulged. I don't feel that it's my place to divulge all of the details of the things that happen in those type of sacred spaces. On top of that, from a colonial perspective, indigenous and Afro-descendant people have been marginalized for centuries. Their spiritual practices have been marginalized. And so I do also feel a sense of protectiveness to an extent, and a bit of discretion in talking about these things. So if you're meant to learn more, you will learn more, right? It'll come to you naturally. Today, I also wanted to talk about limpias. So limpias are often done to cleanse energy. There's all kinds of limpias. There's various types. You will often see, for example, tarot readers cleanse the cards with Palo Santo or sage before doing a reading. For example, in between the astrological signs, if someone is doing like a fire sign reading and then a water sign reading, people will usually cleanse in between to clear the energy, because each of those readings has its own energy to an extent. So you'll see curanderos do this. You'll see a lot of people who do this kind of healing work, cleanse a space and cleanse themselves too before they begin. So there's all kinds of limpias, as I mentioned. A very common kind is done with an egg. So an egg is used to remove bad energy from the body. It is usually passed from the top of the head downwards. And so down the arms, down the midsection, down the legs, feet, etc. And usually prayers are said during the process. So it can be in Our Father, Hail Mary, basically whatever the curandero is guided to do. The egg is then cracked in a clear glass filled with water, and the egg should be kept in place where it will not be moved or disturbed. And this process is repeated for 3 days. And it's really important not to look at the egg, especially from above, like looking over the glass. That is a terrible idea, because essentially the person is like going to reabsorb all the bad energy when they look over the glass into the egg. Now, it is possible to read the egg that's been broken and to kind of look at the yolk and look at the they're almost like little flames that come up, but that takes skill. That's a different level of interpretation that I'm not going to go into. So these kind of limpias can be done by a professional curandero or by a family member. For example, like a grandmother will do it for their grandchildren or a mother for their child. I've known more than one person, and it's super interesting that they are feeling lethargic, they're feeling off balance, and they'll do a limpia, and all of a sudden they really feel like a weight has been lifted. It's so incredible. Or for young children, people can be very jealous of babies, young children, like kind of giving them bad energy unintentionally, even. And so if a baby is like really fussy and the parents take the baby to a Western doctor, right? Like a medical doctor, and they don't find anything wrong. They do the labs and x-rays and blah, 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 and everything's fine. But the baby's still kind of sick, still really fussy. And someone will say like, "Hey, have you done a limpia?" And then, a limpia will be done and all of a sudden the baby can feel better. It's really, really interesting. Again, this is one of those things, like either you believe it or you don't. Like I'm not here to convince people whether or not they think this is true. There's people out there that will think that this is totally like BS and made up and just like old wives' tales, which is fine, to each their own. But like I said, in my own experience, in my own life, I have seen these things be true. I've seen these things in action, and I completely understand their power. So back to limpias, there's also fire limpias that can be done. There are sweeping limpias where a person will sweep a space with intention. And this can be done with flowers or herbs or different natural elements. And it's important to protect yourself whenever doing these kind of rituals. So, for example, like tying a red string or red yarn around the wrist or around the person's hand. The hand that they're using to hold the broom or that they're using to hold the herbs is very important, so that the person doesn't reabsorb the negative energy that they're trying to sweep out of their space. So if you are interested in learning more about these rituals, I do recommend Curandera Erica Buenaflor. She's great. She has several books and lots of online resources. It is a bit unusual for this type of knowledge to be published in a formal way because, like I mentioned before, this is often passed down through oral tradition. And like I mentioned earlier, a lot of this information is kept hidden for good reasons. And moving on to part 3 of my podcast today is evil eye. So finally, I want to talk about evil eye. Evil eye is actually something that is cross-cultural. It's not just Latinx folks that believe in mal de ojo or evil eye. I actually had a conversation with my close friend, shout out to Andrea, and she was the one who pointed out that this idea of mal de ojo exists across the board or in many different communities. So it's really fascinating. It might be called different things, like bad juju, bad energy, but it does exist across the board. So what is it? Evil eye is essentially when people are jealous. And this envy or jealousy is quite literally transmitted. They basically send that bad energy towards somebody else. So, and I tell you folks, you got to be wary. You got to be careful what you share and who you share things with because there are a lot of jealous people. So this evil eye, it can be as simple as negative thoughts or as intentional and intensive as paying a curandera or curandero to perform a spell. So, for example, there are people that will go to a curandero with, you know, bad intentions and try to mess up somebody else's business, somebody else's love, right? It's incredible how people are, but it's rooted in this envy and jealousy. So, as I mentioned before, you have to know that there are curanderos that work with dark magic, okay? And they will tap into more negative energies. And then there are healers who are only willing to work with the light, okay? With light energy, with the Holy Spirit, with God, with all of those divine angels, those kind of things, and they only work for the good. So, as I've issued several warnings now at this point, I really recommend using your best judgment. And you have to proceed with caution because believe me, karma's real, y'all. This kind of stuff can backfire, especially when you go in kind of with the intention of casting a spell on somebody else. Like essentially, anytime a person goes in and is trying to mess up somebody else's life, that never turns out well. Let me just tell you. So, in terms of preventative measures to prevent the evil eye or to at least mitigate the evil eye, people you'll see often will wear a red bracelet or red string to ward off that evil or that envy. So I've noticed a lot of the telenovela stars, they actually will wear red bracelets because certainly if you think about it, they have to navigate a lot of haters. They're in the public eye. Most of them, 99% of them are very attractive. The men and women are very attractive. They are wealthy. They're well off. They're living this glamorous life of being on television. And so, certainly, they get a lot of not only fan mail, but I'm sure they get a lot of hate mail too. We see it with celebrities in general. So, I've noticed that a lot of the telenovela stars will wear a red bracelet or a red string or something red on them pretty consistently. So I thought that was quite fascinating. I actually have a pair of evil eye earrings that I wear, especially if I'm going to be in a large group setting. Like if there's going to be a lot of people around, especially people that I don't know, I will wear them. All this to say is that the world is a lot more mysterious and magical than we give it credit for. That is, if you let it be. And like I mentioned earlier, you may be listening to this episode and think to yourself, what is she talking about? What is she talking about? Egg limpias and evil eye and botanicas. This is so bizarre, right? Again, that's totally cool. That's totally fine. I'm not here to, convince anybody of anything. However, I do have to say, of the folks in my life that are, let's say, on the same wavelength with me, in the same vibe with me, we share things about, the spiritual world, the spiritual realm, things that have happened, synchronicities, etc. And it makes sense. It makes sense. Like I said, if a person is closed off and doesn't believe in spirits and doesn't believe in ancestors or anything like that, and they're very focused on this 3D reality with very heavy energy, then I would say they're missing out. I mean, I don't know, but like I said, I dug deeper into not only my Catholic faith, but into this other spiritual side through tarot and botanicas and all of these things. I had been exposed to them pretty early on as a young person, as a child, pretty much. But as I've gotten older, I have done my own, study, my own digging, my own, interest in pursuing these things. And like I said earlier, too, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. As I've gone through the spiritual process, I've met incredible people. I've met other people who are also very spiritually aligned and who are on this spiritual path as well. They're on a spiritual journey. So that's actually been very cool. It's sort of like unlocking doors, honestly. So, as we wrap up today, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I wanted to share your soul work, or you're also known as your homework. If it's your first time here, I often give folks some food for thought towards the end of the episode. So I encourage you today to consider the following. What rituals do you have? Now, these can be daily rituals, these can be weekly rituals, this can be something as simple as drinking a cup of coffee while sitting on your porch and reflecting. It can be anything, honestly. They can be spiritual or not. It's whatever, I'm just encouraging you to kind of identify and think about what your rituals are, or rituals that you share in your family, or rituals with your friends. Like, for example, with a particular group of friends, whenever I'm in town, we always go to this one specific restaurant, for example, things like that. So, what are your rituals? And then, what are some ways in which you can be more conscious of energy? So, by energy, I mean both the energy that you give off and the energy that you're receiving. So, for example, you may even hear people say, like, oh, like that person has bad energy, or oh, like I feel like I need to go and like cleanse my space after they were here, right? And it's true. Like, as you become more attuned to these things, I definitely have become more sensitive to the people in my space, sharing space with people. It's really, really so interesting, but you begin to pick up on these things. So a lot of it is subconscious. I don't know that people are always as aware of it as they could be. I would encourage you to be more conscious of these things, right? Be more attuned to your feelings, to your reactions, your body's, I should preface that, to your body's reactions to things. Because sometimes your body will tip you off before your brain will. I'll say that again. Sometimes your body will tip you off before your brain will. Like, if you have that sixth sense of like, no, I'm not going to go to the beach today. And then there was something crazy that happened at the beach. Our intuition is active. And by paying attention to those intuitive promptings or those nudges, it really is so helpful. Okay, so I will leave you with that. And I really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Gold Hoops and God podcast, amigas. Please join me on next week's episode entitled, What? Like It's Hard? Shout out to Legally Blonde. I'm going to talk about accomplishments and setting personal goals. Thanks again. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. And reach out to me if you like. I'm on Instagram at goldhoops_God. Take care. Bye. Thanks again for tuning in to the Gold Hoops and God podcast with Dr. Guerra. If you enjoyed my content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can find me on Instagram at goldhoops_god. New episodes are available each Wednesday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Ciao for now.